Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about the Arcanum attribute system, and specifically the original attributes, the way they were designed, not the ones we shipped with. And I'm answering a question someone asked. I'm sorry about this, over a month ago, maybe almost 6 weeks ago. Somebody asked how I came up with the beauty stat for Arcanum, which made me look at the design doc, which made me look at the original design doc, which made me go, whoa, I was planning to do something entirely different. So let me talk about that. So, a brief refresher, if you remember the attributes for Arcanum, there were 8 of them. They were physical and mental. And then there were these 4 categories called power, resistance, prowess, which I'd never liked, and appearance. So the physical ones were strength, con, dex, and beauty. And the mental ones were intelligence, willpower, perception, and charisma. That is not what the original plan was. The original plan had an entire 3rd column called spiritual, which when I get into why I didn't use this, remember that. So we had physical, mental, spiritual, and then the 4 areas were called power, speed, resistance, and appearance. The idea was, how strong were you in that area? How fast? How did you resist taking damage to that area? And then how did that area appear to other people? This meant we had 12 attributes. The 4 physical ones were strength, dexterity, constitution, and beauty. So not a big change there. The mental ones were intelligence, cleverness, willpower, and charisma. So the new one there is the cleverness was how fast you could think on your feet. Like, I originally called it witty, but witty and willpower. I was trying to come up with an acronym. I never did. And then under spiritual, so for power, speed, resistance, appearance, under spiritual, we did passion, zeal, faith, and temperament. So bonus points for you playing along if you notice that I snuck some of those into the outer worlds. You're right. So 12 attributes in 3 categories seemed initially like, this is a great idea. I can attach these to a bunch of different things. They have different meaning, and they make sense because it's how strong I am physically, mentally, and spiritually, how fast I am, how resistant I am to anyone trying to hurt me in those 3 areas, and then how people perceive me in that area. But we ran into problems. First of all, that's just way, way, way too many attributes. When I tried to figure out what all the derived statistics would be, there were just so many. And they were unbalanced. Like, strength and dex ended up having a lot more derived attributes than zeal. But also, it was difficult to connect them because we had 16 skills, the 16 that we shipped with. There were the combat, social, thieving, and tech. So I was trying to figure out how to connect these 12 attributes to 16 skills, and there wasn't a good way to do it that ended up with them being nicely distributed. So that was a problem. That was the second problem with too many stats. The third problem was how to use them in perks, because sometimes you did want an attribute to gate a perk. By the way, I've changed my mind on that. Now I don't like perks that are gated by things that you can't change within the game. And since attributes tend to be fixed, I didn't necessarily want to gate perks. But of course, we hadn't even decided whether attributes would be fixed. But there were that's a lot of attributes to choose from. And also sometimes when it's like, if you have something and you're like, well, is it my intelligence or my willpower that should gate this? Is it my passion or my zeal? So it was hard to come up with things that made sense and that everybody agreed on. And then the other problem I had was, how are people going to buy these? If it's just, here's a bunch of points, you had to give enough points because you have 12 attributes. That's a lot of points to be spread around. But what we noticed was people would just pick a few that they loved and pump them up really high and then dump the other ones, especially ones that didn't factor into anything they cared about on their character. By the way, the more attributes you put in a game, the more attributes there are for people not to care about. So like if you literally never were going to talk to anybody, you could probably dump a lot of the intelligence and spiritual ones. By the way, this is why later on I started experimenting with the idea of geometric shapes for attributes, because the problem with here's a bunch of attributes and here are points you can spend in any of them leads to the problem of if you want to give someone enough points that they can feel like they're having enough variety in character builds, you always end up with the problem of people just buy up a few things really high and lower other things, even in things that don't make sense. Like, how can someone be so strong and have no endurance? Or how can someone be brilliantly intelligent but absolutely no cleverness whatsoever? I mean, yeah, you can think of things that cover this, but there were all these combinations that made people go, I'm trying to imagine the character you're building. So it always struck me that somewhere there was a way to introduce some kind of constraint without it being too constraining or too hard to remember what it was. And by the way, a lot of point games do this. A lot of point games have things like you can't lower anything under a certain amount, or you can't have more than one reduced to the lowest amount, or you can't have more than one raised to the highest amount, or there's just a whole bunch of different ways people have. And it's usually, here's a bunch of points, and then here's a bunch of random rules to assign. And that's why I thought shapes would help with that. Tried it on Outer Worlds, didn't make it past the testing phase. I still think there's a good idea in it. I'm just not smart enough to figure out what that idea is. Maybe one of you will figure it out. So those were the problems I had just from there being so many attributes. Ran into some other problems with all those attributes too. First of all, faith and spirit sounded religious, even though I didn't intend them to be religious. They were the non-mental parts of your inner being, like how emotional were you, or how deep. Temperament's a perfect example. Temperament has nothing to do with your intelligence. Some people are just calm, and some people are not. So I wanted to get those things across. Passion and zeal just kept being confused and conflated in testers' minds. They were like, I don't understand what the difference is between these two. And also, you'll notice I didn't have perception in there. And I wanted perception or something like it. But if we added perception, if we added either a fifth thing or got rid of one of these, what is perception? Because for physical, you have both sight and sound, and they're used differently. Sight is used for ranged attacks, but also seeing if someone's hiding, but also you can hear if someone's hiding. You can also hear maybe that you set off a trap, or you hear something out there and it warns you that it's there. But those are both physical. And then for mental, I'm like, what is your mental version of perception? And I thought it was like something like observation. Like, yeah, you may see something, but did you know the importance of what it was you saw? Like, you know, you saw that one of those books was a different color, but did it occur to you, I wonder if that book is a switch to open the bookcase? That kind of stuff. But there's only one of those. And then for spiritual, I had no idea what perception was going to be. And I didn't want to introduce psychic perception. It was just, how did my inner mental being perceive the world? And I didn't know what to even call that, much less what to make it control. So I ended up reeling it back and to just physical and mental. And I went with the strength, con, dex, and beauty for physical. For cerebral, I wanted an int, willpower, and charisma, but I knew I had to work perception in there. So I just put perception across from dexterity and said, this is your prowess. This is how good you are in this area. It lost being speed and just was about how good you were So for physical, it was literally how fast you were, how dexterous you were. And then for intelligence, it was how good you are at noticing things. And never really liked that. It's what we went with. Now, if you remember, I originally said in a previous video that the costs were supposed to go up, that higher values were supposed to cost more than lower ones. The reason I did this was that way it would cost the same amount of points to be good at a number of attributes as it would be to be great at one attribute and average in the rest. or to be great at several attributes and not so great, kind of bad at the others. I liked that development of just, instead of putting rules out there about, if you can't drop more than one below this or more than one above, it just was like, here's your points. Higher things cost more than lower things. And that worked really well. Especially worked well because I wanted to give auto perks, and we shipped with it, that you gained a perk automatically if you had an attribute at 20 in Arcanum. So I loved that, but people could really abuse it by just pushing a lot of attributes up to 20 and a lot of other ones at 1, especially ones they didn't care about and they didn't get anything bad happening at 1. So we ended up shipping with the attributes we have now, which were fine. I mean, they did their work. But the interesting thing about this, and you have to realize this if you go into game design, no one's ever happy. If you do the same kind of attributes a lot, people are like, I've seen this. This is boring. Why are you mired in the past? You're an old developer. If you do new stuff, people are like, why did you fix it? It wasn't broken. You're doing newness just to be new. This is a dumb idea. Those kind of constructive comments. So it's really hard sometimes, even when you're doing something as fundamental as developing attributes, to come up with something new so it feels fresh, but not so new that you incur the wrath of people who are like, I liked how the old one worked. Bleh. So we ended up shipping with the attributes that you know and love from Arcanum. But I've always thought about this attribute system for a number of reasons, which is A, it was different, but also it was constructed with a foundational approach. It was not, hey, I think I want luck. Let's throw it in. It was, here are the categories and nature of an attribute, and then we filled in that matrix with what I thought would be appropriate. We ended up doing it that way for Arcanum, but always in the back of my head, I've always wondered what those other ones could have done and what kind of game I could have made with them. But there's always new games to be made. So I hope that gives you a little insight into where Arcanum's attributes eventually came from.